Hello, and welcome to Coding Bootcamp's Intro to the Python Programming Language, Project's Companion to the course that I ran for Coding Bootcamps. Might want to check that out, codingbootcamps.com. My name is Stephen Elmeroth. This Project's Companion will talk about 4 different videos. This particular video will talk about the dice game that we're going to be writing in the Python programming language. So that is a guess the rolling dice game. It's going to be a 2-player game. Each round, both players guess the number on the rolling die, and the player that guesses correctly more times wins. That's basically it. Pretty simple. So let's get into a procedural way to write the code for this game. After that, we're going to look at a little object-oriented programming. But for now, let's just get the gist of it down with running just regular procedure calls, function. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at would be this hash bang here. This is a way for script files to tell an operating system what interpreter or what preprocessor to run. And we are going to call this program env, which is located in user bin, and we're going to pass it a argument called Python. So let's look at the terminal for a second. Now, if we get that again, we say user bin env. It's going to print out a bunch of this stuff. And if we say Python, it's going to print our Python interpreter, Python 3.6. That's what that does. Okay, so let's look at that again. Now we should be able to just run this program. If we're going to just execute the program, then let's say dot. It's going to the hash bang has to be the first line of the program. And it has to have this hash and then a bang, and then you can give it a command. So we tried to do that, but it said permission denied because we don't have any executable permissions on the end of our. If you don't know, this is Linux, the default way to list files, the long version. LL is short for ls-l. And I'm running OpenSUSE Leap 4.15. So I can say I can add execute permissions to this program. And now you can see we have the X's on there. So this is the owner. The owner has read, write, execute permissions for this file. And the group, the owner is staff. and the group has read and execute, no write permission, just read and execute permissions for this file. The group is users. And finally, all the others also have read and execute permissions. So everybody that can access this file can execute it. So now we can run it. It says how many rounds you want to play. We'll play 1 round. A, guess a number 1. Got it. What a good guess. And B is also going to guess 1. Try to get, nope. Dice rolled a 2. So A is the winner. 1-0. Okay, so that's the basic game. Now let's just look at the first line again. Let's take that line out. So let's take this line out. And now that line is gone. Now let's try to execute it, and it's going to do some other crazy thing for. I'm not exactly sure what what it tried to do there. Something interesting. You got to be careful with writing programs. So let's put that back. Let's go back to our visual code and put that back in. And it looks like we want to, let's instead look at this version. Alright, so you can see we have the hash bang is gone. Now let's put it back. And then try to run it. And see if we can now run it again. And now it runs. So, okay. So let's go through the code. We are importing a standard library module called random. So we can generate random dice rolls, or 2 dice, 1 die. So in this case it's 1 die, a random die roll. So let's, well, we don't need to talk about importing. I talked about that in the students video. So let's just continue on with the code. We're going to define a helper function here called getInit, and we accept 3 arguments: a text, a minimum, and a maximum. So min and max are built-ins to the Python programming language. We can see that. If we go in here, we can type in min, and it's a built-in function. So we can say, what's the minimum of 1, 2, 3? Minimum. So let's. Well, the reason we're defining this is that we are going to ask for input from the user, and then we are going to check if that input is between the minimum and maximum that we want. So if, you'll see in a minute that we don't want somebody to, if they're guessing the dice roll or the die roll, we don't want them to guess negative numbers or 0 or 7 or 99 or anything. It has to be between 1 and 6. So we'll see that. As we can see down below, the getInt, we're going to be say, hey, this is our text, and we say, hey, guess a number between 1 and 6. So we'll see that in a second. Actually, we've already seen it, but we'll see it again more slowly this time. So that's our getInt function, just a simple helper. All right, so Now this is where our program really begins. After our import and we declare the helper function, now this is where our real main line begins. At line 12, we're going to ask the number of rounds. So we say get int, which is the helper we just defined and just talked about. We're going to take the value and put it into, via this assignment operator, we're going to store it into this new variable we're declaring called rounds. Python's great. You don't have to declare a variable. Just use it. Just assign to it. If it exists, it'll overwrite it. If it doesn't exist, it'll create it. Pretty simple. So we're going to give it the text to say, hey, how many rounds do you want to play? And we're going to limit them between 1 and 20. So we're going to set our initial counters to 0. And then this is where our game starts. So we're going to have a for loop here and say for however many rounds they declare, or they tell us it when we ask them to say how many rounds you want to play. They say they wanted to play 20 rounds. Then the range function will return an object that produces a sequence of integers between 1 and 20. All right, so we can say, so range 1, 20. Range 120 is a print. Yeah. Between well, you can give it a stop, but let's see, between 1 and 20, we can say, I think you have to list it out because it comes back as a range object. So it'll go up to 19, and if you just say range 20, it'll go 0 to 19. I think that's really what we want. So if somebody says they want 20 rounds, then it'll go between 0 and 19. That's 20 numbers. If you count 0. So we'll print that out, and then we'll say, okay, A, well, via this function, we'll say, A, guess a number between 1 and 6. And we're saying range. Oh, we're just getting the input here. So this is the guess here. We're going to say, so he guesses 1. And then we're going to say, now dice is capitalized. This is, I think this. Let's see. Should we do it? Should we change it? Let's do it, because usually we have variables with a lowercase name and objects, factories, classes, and such. Well, take uppercase. Okay, so we're doing the same thing for A and for B, and that is basically we're taking the guess, and then we're taking the dice roll, and we're saying if they're equal, then we got it, and we're increasing his win counter. And the same with B. And then at the end, we're going to compare them. If they're equal, then it's a tie. Otherwise, we declare the winner. Pretty simple. So let's see it's running here. How many rounds? Let's play 3 rounds. All right. How many rounds? All right, round 1. Guess a number. I'll guess 1. Dice was 3. B, guess a number. 3. Got it. It rolled 2 3s in a row. Nice. Okay, round 2. A, guess a number. He's also sticking with 3. Boom. Dice rolled 3 3s in a row. That's almost raising red flags for a bug in the program. But, and I did change that dice variable from upper to lower. So let's stick with a winner. B, guess a number. Oh, it was a 4. Round 3. Guess a number. All right, now it can't be 3 or 4. So let's say 2. Boom. Score. This looks like I'm cheating somehow. And we're going to go random here. B's going off the board. 5. Now it was a 3. Should have gone with a 3. So A is the winner. It would be good to put the score here, you know, like how many for each player, since there were so many wins here. But that's the basic game. So now let us take a look at the object-oriented version of the same game. All right. So say play 2 rounds, and then he's going to guess a number. 1. We'll guess all 1s. No 1s were rolled. So this program works. Okay, so let's look at the code. We've already sort of peeking at it, but we've introduced, again, we've looked at this boilerplate from the last program, and now we're going to define a class. 2 classes, as a matter of fact. We're going to define a player, which has a constructor or initializer. I guess under new would be the constructor. You could think of it that way. And this is a dunder in it, because we have a double underscore. And you could think of this as a constructor for whenever we create a new player, this is the code that gets executed. And bound methods are going to receive automatically from Python as the first argument a reference to itself, which is, you can call it anything you want, but everybody calls it self. You could call this variable anything you want, but it's just good to call it self. It's standard. So this will accept from the user code, 1 argument, name. So when you create a new player, you're going to give it the name, and which we don't create a player directly. We create guessers, because the guesser class inherits from player, and it has its own quote constructor, which it accepts the name, and then it calls the super, and the super is the call to all of the, based on the method resolution order, all of the other classes that it inherits from. So it's going to call, super here is going to call player.init and pass the parameter we were passed. And then it will finish off its construction code, just initialize underscore guess to 0. So it has 1 function and 1 property. And this is a getter and this is a setter. This is Python's way to do it with these decorators. To me, this is kind of a funky way to do it. It's not very pretty as Python is. It just is a little clucky here, but if you read internal conversations, everybody's got their opinion what they wanted it to be, and Guido, the benevolent dictator for life of the Python programming language, or I should say the first benevolent dictator, he said, okay, let's do it like this. This is how you can say, whenever we reference guest, you can see guest here is a function. We're defining the function here called guest, and we're saying player.guest equals role. So, this doesn't have, we're not saying player run player.guest. Doesn't have parentheses. It's not a function. How come it's not a function? Well, that's because it has this decorator here, which we're not going to get into. But basically that turns this function into a property. So it does some internal, renaming. But basically we also have this internal thing. So actually the value we store inside of the class is underscore guess. And this is not a very good example because it's usually underscore guest. But suffice it to say it works. And then this is the setter. So whenever you query this guesser, instantiated guesser object, so it would be player or whatever dot guest, and you want to know the value, or you're reading the value, you're running this function, and when you're setting the value, then you're running this function. It passes the value. So object-oriented programming basically lets you define these classes, and then you can call them. Here you can see they're called with a parentheses, and you pass it any values it needs. There's our name, and it will create an object from this guesser class. So now player A has this interface for this class. It has an init method, which you don't need to call manually, but it has a guess method and a guest property. So let's run through the code here. Basically the same code we saw, but we have player A and player B are guessers, and then we loop them. So once for player A and once for player B. We're creating a pointer to first player A, then next time we loop through player B. So we're saying player guess. Go ahead and guess, and it's going to say, okay, take the name, and it's going to say name, comma, guess a number. So name, comma, which should be player, first time through it's player A, so the name for player A is A. So we're going to say player A, guess. And then he'll input it and guess. And then we'll say, okay, and then we'll get a roll, and then we'll print what it was rolled, and then we'll compare them. Are they equal? And if they're equal, then we got it, and we increase our wins. Same as the last program. And that is basically it. So we have this guest business here, and we're going to say, let's get rid of this guest here. This is just a little bit unneeded functionality, just making it overly complicated. And let's say guest. So we'll start off guest as let's start off as none, and which is a Python object, and we will say when you guess, it'll save the guess inside of there. So let's see if it still runs. Let's try it. How many rounds? Let's play one round. Player A, guess a number. A guesses 1. 6. B guesses 2. Wait, it was a 3. It's a tie. So you can see it worked. And this is much easier for those who didn't really follow my bad explanation for the getter and setter property decorators. Then this is really all that's happening. We have this guest variable, but we didn't change how we used it. It's still used down here as guest. And that's basically it. So I hope you learned something. And be sure to check out the other videos if you want to see some more project programming. And we will see you in the next video. Okay, thanks guys.